Will McCartney, welcome to my pod, The Resolution Room.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
AI is, of course, the talk of the town. But I wanted to talk to you because you're a young founder. You started a business called Habeas, and we'll talk about what makes Habeas different and what problem you're trying to solve. You did your primary degree in Cambridge, and you studied law, but you stepped away from that because you're on the build of Habeas. Have I hit your academic qualifications well, Will? Is there anything I've missed?
When I went over to study in Cambridge, I only studied there for about a year, and then COVID hit and impacted, lots of people in lots of different ways. But it ended up leading to a bit of a change in the pathway, which was transferring to UCID Arts Law. The last 5 years, 6 years have been very tumultuous, and it's harder to plan on a set timeline in the way that you might initially try and do coming out of uni.
Yeah, I hear you. And you've been with Habeas you started it, of course, it's a founder-led business, for about 3.5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, so I would say I was the first sort of year to maybe 18 months, I was part-time because I was still studying arts law. That takes up quite a portion of your week. And so maybe there was a bit of a split allocation in that first year in particular of maybe spending, 20, 30 hours a week on the business and something like 20 hours on legal studies and work there and just going into uni. And then kind of made a commitment towards from recollection, like early 2024, mid 2024, to just sort of go full time on tech work and business work and focusing on Habeas. So I kind of deferred at that point.
And focus on where you are now. I can say this because it's fair to say that I'm quite a bit older than you. That's a safe comment, Will. So I came from the Pac-Man generation. Computers came to us in the beginning of our career in law, but we've seen this technological uptick and changed our processes. And I wouldn't describe myself as a Luddite because, I adopted with technology to run a large portfolio business when I was in practice. And, I read electronic briefs and all the rest of it. The system has entirely changed. But I've been really fascinated as a former leader in professional services by AI. I think it's an absolute game changer. And I think that there's at times a state of denial about how significant it's going to be. And I guess from my perspective as too, I've got a personal interest at stake in the sense that our older boy, he's now 22, is in fifth year of arts law at ANU. And I think that his legal career is going to look quite different than mine, and just in one generation. So that's kind of by way of broad framing. But let's turn to Habeas. I'm obviously interested in the product, but I'm more interested in the fundamentals. What problem is Habeas trying to solve? Why did you set it up?
Starting out, the main focus was on legal research and the fact that I had, personally experienced that when it came to traditional legal search engines, there was probably some issues in practice, not only in a law school context, but then as I was reaching out to lawyers and law firms and sort of this systemic frustration with traditional legal search. And keyword and Boolean search can be great in a lot of contexts, and especially if you know what you're looking for. But I was kind of aware that there was a lot of changes in the last 5 to 10 years in underlying search technology, which the majority of the Australian legal profession probably wasn't using or getting access to. Even basic things like semantic search or the ability to ask natural language queries, which sort of predates even generative AI, the fact that that hadn't really been incorporated in a meaningful way. And so the problem we were looking to solve was how can we make legal search, legal research more intuitive, still accurate, even in a world of AI first legal research, but more intuitive to the end user so that they can take any thought that's in their brain, ideally, because lawyers are great at asking questions. And so what if we had a world where rather than the lawyer having to become a coder and sort of doing Boolean searches in half of their workday, could we get to a point where that question could be translated and they could really have a rigorous search experience that retrieves the right authorities, retrieves the right analytical information that they're looking for, right?
And when did it morph into something broader? So your starting point was legal research. And I pause to say that what makes Habeas different is it's entirely predicated on Australian law and Australian legal system, as opposed to, if you like, a broader global play. So, where has it now moved towards, Will, aside from the research question?
Well, I also just think in the last year from 2025 to 2026, and sort of with all the updates in AI, like you have to have products that are covering multiple bases where people feel like they can do a decent chunk, if not the core of their legal work in that platform. And so you've kind of got the emergence of course, a lot more lawyers trying out ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, and then, realizing some of the limitations maybe of those platforms in legal settings. And so a lot of people wanted Habeas to also be capable of like advanced drafting. And we noticed that people were not only doing research, they were also then, once they'd done their research, looking to draft that into a submission statement or any number of potential document formats. And Habeas was capable of that, but it probably just wasn't our primary focus in terms of engagement with matters, which is another thing. We integrated document search features into the platform where people could upload their own matter files or their own repository of case law and secondary commentary, whatever it might be, so that they could actually actively search over, analyze, and produce sort of initial work product from that information. So it was more of a matter of the platform expanded into other drafting, document search, and like what I would call legal intelligence features, especially from early 2025 onwards. And that was really led by customers and seeing that people wanted to do those tasks in a very particular type of way. And so it's kind of that thing of, if it doesn't disrupt the other core flows and value adds in the platform, and you can add more value or solve a broader problem, it's very worth, I guess, trying to build those features in. And especially in a landscape where people already have a very high bar, I think, for legal AI now, because of having seen what even default players or having tried Claude or something like that, which a lot of barristers are starting to do now. And so their expectations of what they will even subscribe for, that's totally changing the legal landscape, I would say.
And is your target market, if you like, Will? I mean, it's sometimes really hard to shift the larger national, international firms, and they've got a different price point and different issues. Is your market more the small to medium, or where you targeting Habeas as we speak?
We are mostly focused on, I guess, markets where we already have a strong product market fit, as in we've had at least 5 to 10, whether in the past, like strong testimonials, referrals. Those are the markets we then narrowed down on and probably are focusing on more. So I think one of those this year is our self-serve customer base, which could be sole practitioners and barristers primarily. That could even extend to someone who runs like a 2 or 3 person firm and they need an extra license for a paralegal or something. But really, they are the driving machine behind their practice. And then secondly, small to mid-sized sort of litigation firms and boutique firms in particular, where they might be in that range of 20 to 30 people a firm, sometimes more. There's also probably a pretty strong fit with them, although sales timeline, and especially since firms are often busy and in court, can be more complex there. In-house lawyers is a new one for us. We haven't focused on in 2025, but we have heard some really excellent feedback from general counsel who have maybe just even signed up to the platform, so they haven't gone through our enterprise sales route. I think in those 3 different types of categories, you've got different types of fit, right? And different ways that users are really engaging, getting value, which is kind of the complexity of framing that value in any conversation. I have to be across the distinctions in how, an in-house lawyer's daily workflow goes and how they're going to use Habeas. And I guess we can caveat this broadly by saying, because Habeas has an appeal, this sort of focus on reducing hallucinations, fact and case law informed information, and then also being very specific to a legal sort of configuration in the way that you can use the tool and the way that it outputs information. There's probably interest from a number of sectors beyond the ones I've just listed, including, for example, universities we have relationships with, or that we've done pilots with or have grants with, or things like that. So it is a diverse range of opportunities there. And then it's more, there's certain ones we want to focus on probably more because we see there's already a good fit.
Let's talk a bit broad compass, because you're in this space. This is your day-to-day work, and I look on as an observer and at times a commentator. But talk us through the trust issues and the hallucination. This is what I understand as a non-tech guy. Hallucinations happen because we tend to think it's a person at the other end communicating with it, but it's a predictive model, and so they're really predicting what you should know based on the data set they're drawing from. So, and of course, an AI model doesn't know. Won't be able to say I don't know. So because of its predictive nature, it's made stuff up at times. Am I on the money? Is that what's played out, or is it more complex than that? No doubt.
Broadly, you're on the money in the sense that it would be the right framing to say that oftentimes generative AI solutions, just raw large language models that companies are producing, always have a risk of hallucination. And it's something that companies have already, like frontier labs that are building these models, have already done a good job of reducing over the years. Just even in the span of the past 3 years, the hallucination rate, etc., has lowered pretty dramatically. But yes, it's something intrinsic more to the nature of the way that the text works, and so of the way the tech works. And so one of the, I guess, confusions in this space is a tendency to just kind of conflate the term AI, and people just think of everything in this one broad brush category, when of course you have so many different iterations there under the hood. So you have, machine learning pipelines, you have generative AI systems, you have custom platforms that leverage external AI models, but they do so in a way where they've created custom code and architecture around that. You have platforms like ours that are more premised on the idea of being search first, inference second, which is prioritizing an actual real world retrieval, search, or analysis step where we go out, look at real data and information, and that's always cited to the user. And then you kind of get an analysis or inference layer on top. Then you've also kind of got the emergence of a lot of people who will engage in fine-tuning models for particular domains, which can have its pros and cons, but that's using maybe a particular data set to focus a model. And then there's also the rise of other types of models that are of interest for forms of legal work, like encoder models. And without getting too deep into that, there's basically other types of AI models that we can look at that don't hallucinate, but which also kind of have their pros and cons in real world legal workflows, right? You have this, core issue, and then you've got a whole range of different providers, apps that have different ways of trying to either solve that problem or build architectures around it.
So is the trust issue, do you think, well-founded historically? But from what I'm hearing from you, it's significantly improving. I mean, we've all read cases around AI producing submissions, citing cases that don't exist, and some practitioners finding themselves in very hot water about that. In terms of, say, the Habeas approach, because it's very much research first and draws on existing data, and established case law and precedent, that it sort of negates some of those issues. But what I'm hearing more broadly is you think that rightly there's been these trust issues, but over time it will significantly improve. Is that a fair summary?
That's broadly a fair summary. And I think in the first few years, particularly 2023 to 2025, there was a lot of marketing that just focused on, or LinkedIn posts and stuff like that, that just focused on the problem or just focused on reporting that this was an issue. It wasn't helping necessarily educate people on the idea that, oh, wait, we already have, companies like Habeas here in the space that, you can go and you can see every reference point. You can see down into the data, just like a traditional search engine. You can see where information has come from. You can almost trace the chain of reasoning, whether or not that gives you greater observability as a lawyer. Or, we've got even foundation model providers like OpenAI and Anthropic, and understanding that, these companies are open about how the models work under the hood, and you need to use any tool like generative AI artfully and skillfully and be aware of the way that technology that you're using. And so even the practitioners that landed themselves in hot water, oftentimes, I think sometimes maybe were coming from the wrong base. They were assuming this thing was like a fact machine or a truth machine producing something that was from a set database, when it wasn't. They were maybe just using a foundation model. I think in Australia in particular, if we can just put these things into different baskets and really not just kind of focus on, oh, hallucinations exist, but more like, okay, well, where can we send people? Which solutions can they use so that they can not only mitigate this risk, but also empower themselves to understand how they're using AI better? Because I think the 98 to 99% of people as well who are utilizing these tools in certain ways do kind of understand as well, they're the pilot, and their legal judgment is still imperative. and it's not a truth machine per se. It's not necessarily the way it's designed. At least, currently, it's more like you have different platforms that are capable of different types of analysis, search, retrieval.
And I tend to agree when I've come across those sort of cases, and I understand that courts of times have had um, quite blunt responses, but I sort of see it a bit differently in the sense that, well, it's a bit like a junior drafting something that you signed off on as a partner, say, and it's not right. Well, really, it's up to you to interrogate. You may be working with the junior to make sure it is right, and checking the case and checking the primary references, etc. So I think you sent me through something in preparation for podcast, which I was fascinated by, which is Australians are very much in the legal scene, very much early adopters and quite common users of AI, compared with other jurisdictions. That in itself is fascinating.
Yeah, and I think there's mixed data on this. So I've read several probably contradicting reports, some of which show lower levels of usage and some of which, like for example, the Clio report I sent show higher levels of usage and adoption. What I can say is that me in just as a founder interacting with people, I have seen, particularly in the last year and a half, definitely a swing towards people at least having tried some kind of model, integrating something into their workflow, even at a basic admin level. Of course, now in particular, I think there's even more of a sense of a competitive risk if you're not utilizing the technology in some way. And it's very different to even a few years ago in the way I was seeing this. But I really think a very broad base of lawyers and people beyond, even in compliance fields and stuff, are absolutely adopting AI. And then it becomes this broader question of, also which tools are people adopting, because this is an additional complexity layer, which is some people as well may have only ever tried free version of ChatGPT. And that's their understanding of, kind of what AI is capable of, or they're working off a slightly older model of what AI could do a year and a half ago. So I think that they'll have a very distinctly different experience as well to people that are using frontier tools or people that are, using platforms like Habeas, for example. Yeah, I do think this adoption rate is pretty incredible to see. It's at least happened in some capacity. And then I think it's a slower moving process when it comes to the small to mid-sized market and their adoption of more specialized legal AI tools and being aware more broadly of what else is beyond there outside of the classic brand names that they might have interacted with in the past.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I'm interested about as a former law firm leader, and seeing technology in various iterations throughout the course of my career, sometimes people have this tendency to think of it as a product issue and not really properly think of it as a people issue. How do you get adoption, train people? And I guess that begs the question that you said about, for younger practitioners particularly, how do you train them to to prompt it well, to interrogate the underlying data well, and to be really accurate and considered? And I think that's going to be a lot of training and development in that people space. Do you think there's something in that?
Yeah, and it's a tricky one as well, because I actually have seen that, firsthand where our highest levels of adoption often come from people who are jumping on the platform. They're a self-serve sole prac or barrister or whatever it is, and then they've got that inherent desire to learn about AI, empower themselves with the best tools possible. Whereas in a large or even small firm context, if a pilot is brought in to the firm, people are billing, they're doing their day-to-day work, they're busy, they might not have the same incentives internally to even fully get the most out of a tool to use it in its full depth. So I've seen that firsthand. And I think in terms of training, yeah, of course, there's a training and internal firm policy element there. But I think it's more broadly, I probably look at it as just as a developer or someone who's a founder and entrepreneur, it's more like the mental models that people are going to have to become accustomed to and are developing in a legal setting. And if you can almost create this right mental model within the firm of how you embrace, but also become sensitive and aware to the risks when it comes to adopting AI, those firms probably do a lot better. And so, that might be a mental model, which is we adapt new tools fast, but we actually put them through their paces. We think deeply around which software we're using, its capabilities, the data sets it's trained on, how lawyers in the firm can validate responses and information, how they can best use the feature sets available on the platform. And I see also a very strong difference between the type of lawyer. Like I've seen some lawyers who come onto Habeas, type in one keyword search or two and get frustrated and kind of leave. And that's very different. Like we see once people have submitted 5 or 10 prompts, their chance of staying as a long-term customer is very different. And the people who have already seriously engaged with the idea of, okay, I need to actually frame my question in natural language, or I need to understand how to use this particular tool to the best capability and effect, rather than just kind of dismissing a technology outright when you start because it doesn't conform to the old way of maybe, say, searching legal data or analyzing material, right? So that's my broader thing, is probably it's just more like firms are building certain team cultures, dynamics, and mental models. And those are what influences whether people in the firm pick something up. And I also think, side note there's obviously some trickiness in various settings. For example, if we go in as Habeas and we're working with a small firm, like even recently a firm in the Blue Mountains, their head partners were, one of them is in his 60s, he's going to retire soon. And, we didn't allocate a seat for him. And I'm not the sort of person who pushes anything on anyone. And that seemed fair because realistically, he wasn't going to adopt AI into his workflow. And it's just not of interest to him. And that's fine. But for newer people in the firm, there is this inherent probably need and to become, aware and adapt to it and so forth. So, yeah.
And one of the things that I know you've spoken about on your blogs and a view that I have too is that where the rubber really hits the road with AI is going to be a disruption of the fundamental business model of law firms, which is when we start to see less reliance on the billable hour. We've seen that in certain fields of work. Insurance comes to mind as one. But I think once we start to see that metric being disrupted, that will really mean that there's going to be wholesale change. And I think, sadly, with law firms, it's often more client-driven than lawyer-driven, which will produce some of these forces. What do you think about that?
Yeah, in terms of, I guess, this broader idea of, disruption to the traditional law firm model, it's probably already been happening in the last couple of years in one form or another. I think, first of all, a lot more clients may be getting a first pass from AI. There's pros and cons to that. Potential pro is that you can frame, and this applies to anything, it applies to medicine, etc. We can say that, especially people who are just using it responsibly, they might come in more informed to a client meeting. They might have a better awareness of their basic legal rights, the basic frameworks in place for them. So that can be a positive. It might also help, I guess we can say this colloquially, but ensuring that law firms are operating at a higher standard for the consumer so that the advice, the work they're doing is demonstrably better than what the consumer or that person going into a firm or that small business is doing on their own, right? Some of the negatives there obviously mean that you might have stuff that's half-baked, or it's not quite the right advice, or a client already thinks that they know the position that should be taken, and the lawyer will then have to guide them and say, that's not correct, here's why. And that can create extra, a lot of lawyers I've talked to might be frustrated with that elements of that dynamic as well, right? And I think, more broadly, systematically, probably we will see a lot of firms moving beyond billable hour models, more package models, package pricing, coming up with more creative ways to price their services. I think it's probably more hitting the small to mid end of the market more because the companies that engage with large firms are doing it for different reasons, more as like a large insurance play on court battles that could otherwise cost them hundreds of millions. So they're not too worried about the broader fee they're paying, but that's not as true on the lower to mid size of that market. And so it has a lot of flow-on effects. I could go in probably a lot of directions there, but I've already been seeing it. And I think, it creates a lot of new competitive tensions that firms have to be aware of, I guess.
And as well as these challenges, what I say to people in terms of the upside potentially or opportunity is the actual reality that with a democratization at some level of the technical skill, the premium is going to be relationship strategy and relationship management. So in a sense, the irony is these things that people referred to historically as soft skills will actually assume far more importance. And I think larger law firms are really grappling with that reality now. The idea of you've got to have a bigger strategic play, the notion of genuine client partnership to bring that value. So that, I guess that's one of the upsides. Have you seen that play out as well?
Yeah, I definitely have. I mean, even in technology, that's all like because this is impacting everyone in every business space. But in technology, that's also people asking, well, where is the moat with different types of tech businesses as well? And I think relationship still plays into that quite heavily. Long-term relationships of why someone would go with your business over any other or trust your business. That's still in here definitely today. And I think as well, like there's other things like law firms are probably going to take a strategy. So you'll get some people to go way more generalist deliberately and take on a much more diverse range of matters due to the advances in AI and seek to probably improve firm profits there. But you also get some people who become even more highly niche and specialist in their practice and the work that they're doing and almost make it so that there's a very clear reason why someone would work with them long term and like really trust their expertise in a particular niche. And I think that still matters quite a bit in a legal setting compared to some other industries now, even like coding and development, which has been like hard hit. At least I certainly know that like significant percentages of work that I used to do several years ago, it's fundamentally changed that dynamic and how quickly you can get it done and to a high standard. So, yeah. And then I think in terms of just like broader disruptions to the legal industry, as you said, this democratization element is something that we can be excited about because oftentimes in the legal industry, especially from the lawyer perspective, it's not as talked about, but access to justice issues, the fact that most people find the justice system slow, extremely admin based. Sometimes people are self-representing on matters that can take many, many, many years to resolve. I've talked personally to many people who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers, and then they are, still in that matter 3 years down the line. So these are the real lived, everyday realities of a lot of people. And the benefits of AI there are absolutely huge, particularly the right AI software that probably integrates elements of what we know from traditional legal search, traditional legal data, where it's fact informed, source informed, but where it also empowers people to give them a basic overview of various things, or even a quite serious analytical overview of things that can help them. And so, yeah, I think that's a positive thing that we can also focus on and like really try and focus towards as a nation, even at the government level, hopefully. And even with these notes from like the federal court recently and stuff on AI, I have seen that a bit of a shift where it's like, it's actually not too negative towards AI. It's accepting its presence there and then just thinking carefully about rollout and how people use these tools.
You're right to hit that point. There's real issues around the democratisation, which is fortunate, but you think of it also from the perspective of tribunals managing it, say Fair Work or something like that, that now that the barriers are reduced, managing that increased workload, which is probably a good thing, that they were designed to allow relatively easy access. Often you needed leave to get lawyers. So it's basically trying to facilitate, resolutions. But it'll be interesting to see how the tribunals grapple with this increased workload, won't it? That can be born out of the way they're designed, plus add on to that the AI features. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, because of the shift in, elements of how law is done and information is accessed now that's happening and is going to continue to happen what we're probably grappling with, and this isn't my department or my issue to solve, but it's more a government issue, which is the architecture of law and even courts themselves and how judicial processes are done probably is going to need a bit of a rework, and there's going to need to be a serious think about what can be improved, what can be changed, what could even be automated, or how could we, for example, for smaller scale matters like people who might be going to Fair Work, etc., are there ways that we can create a better system that allows more people to resolve their matter or whatever it is that they're working on? So I actually see it as more of a it's an architectural thing in a way, and the architecture of law and how law is currently done is going to need a bit of a rethink and reshape in Australia. that doesn't mean throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's like we've already got a great system there in many respects, but it's about looking seriously at like what isn't working and how can we use a mix of technology or government investment or a redesign of certain court systems to make them more efficient, all these sorts of things. And yeah, I think in the short term, you are going to see just, this broader issue of a higher demand and being placed on the Fair Work Commission and other entities. And so that is a short-term thing that, we also need to be managing, but it points to a broader structural issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that gets to the point of basically, processes were designed largely even pre-technology, let alone pre-AI. And then you've got, for example, large law firms looking at how do you adopt AI to improve efficiency and expertise in already existing processes. And then you've got the emergence of native AI firms. Now, their difference is they're built from the ground up with AI as opposed to like AI as a nice add-on. And I've noticed some commentary on native AI law firms coming from America with some big capital investment in that space. So watch that as well, I reckon, Will, in terms of where that's going to take us.
Yeah, that's going to be an increasingly common model that's adopted, and it's not just the marketing. So I think there's already firms that if you look at their process, 80 to 90% of the initial triage, case prep work, a large chunk of it is being done by AI anyway. And so we could almost argue they are already to a strong degree an AI native firm. They might not market themselves, that might not be on their website. Obviously, in the US, the massive degree of VC interest in the legal tech industry at the moment means that there's probably a stronger desire to push, companies that adhere or brand themselves on that sort of model right at the moment. Yeah, I do think that will probably fundamentally change quite a few things in terms of especially D2C law as well. I think there's already firms in Australia that have adopted interesting models like Sprint Law and companies like that, but there's plenty of others that are already reconceptualizing like how more simple matters and matters that are more clear cut can be processed. Lots of very interesting developments, and I think we are probably moving towards just an acceptance broadly of like the importance of having AI native workflows. And I think that applies more to simple matters and contracts and stuff, but of course, a complex issue that's being litigated in the High Court over many years, it's a different terrain. It's a sort of thing where someone using Habeas might be looking for that extra level of analysis, deep research, and like integration with traditional search databases that they might be more used to having come up with and in their work. Yeah, there's different types of use cases and models, I think, that are going to merge.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was going to talk to you briefly, but we're running out of time, quickly about the Anthropic moment. That was basically a play by a major player saying we're getting into this space. It's been dominated by the big legal tech businesses. And we saw in February, LexisNexis, their share price dropped. What's that about? Do you think that signals a broader change in the market, or is that just a little blip?
I think it does signify a broader change in like investors and the market broadly like picking up now on something that was already probably true 2 years ago, but Anthropic probably with their ability to like drop software, market it very well, they do have a tendency to be able to shake the market a bit because investors see it and it sort of spooks things a bit. And yeah, I think it structurally is more just indicative of the fact that SaaS businesses, there's questions around moat. Where is their moat? It's no longer, it might be data to a degree, but it's no longer necessarily data because I think in an AI first world already, a lot of that is being relitigated. Like some AI companies in the US have won like surprisingly on certain copyright suits. So maybe data is no longer the moat. Software design itself is something that's increasingly easier to do with much smaller teams that can move much more rapidly than big companies and with AI first workflows. But also just understanding that in that particular Anthropic instance, it just sort of peeking behind the veil. I don't think the particular plugin they released at that time was anything that was incredibly special, but it sort of posed a challenge to this idea that this could only be the exclusive wheelhouse of specialized legal technology companies. And so this applies to all sorts of other markets beyond legal, with recently Figma, with Claude releasing like Claude's sort of new design features, and Figma also experiencing volatility in their stock. And so I think also I've been espousing something similar for many years, like even back in 2023 to knowledge leaders, that when it comes to actual core technology, and obviously that's often not why big businesses exist. It's many things beyond technology. It's their distribution, their sales, their marketing, their client relationships, of course. But I've been espousing that, and it was something that maybe was never taken seriously in those first few years. And now that narrative is coming true to a degree. Sometimes it takes a big, massively funded player like an Anthropic to really get that message across. And I think as well, that's not a bad thing, because we have existing, especially in research, of like a duopoly for quite a period of time, but then also that has implications for pricing models and the feeling that certain people are priced out of accessing great legal tech because they happen to be from a smaller firm or something. With our Habeas mission, our pricing tiers are very reasonable, and we've always tried to like convey to people they can have access to state-of-the-art technology. In fact, technology that often outperforms what AI native new solutions are being rolled out by bigger companies, because it's our domain and expertise. They can compete on that same level. So I think that is also now filtering through the profession. I'll just add that, even if I'm calling up to a barrister, recently one said, "Oh, I'm already using Claude. I also use Jade, like the free version of Jade, pretty common with barristers." And then I looked up on Perplexity, is there anything that integrates with Australian case law? And I thought that was a highly unusual thing, which is we were getting effectively a lead from a business sense from someone who'd looked us up on an AI tool or said, is there anything that integrates with Australian law? That goes to show that even the way people will discover and think about buying products is different now. I do think it's a really massive change probably in the market. It doesn't mean that those companies will tank or dip or not survive. It just means it's a significant challenge and to their model and the underlying assumptions made about what their IP is in the first place. That's a good thing broadly, which is if we can also increase access to extremely high quality technology across a lot of other fields and democratize access at least somewhat, it's going to require changes on the profession's end as well. But yeah, I think we can do that.
That's a great comment. I like to end on that, Will, but I want to say a couple of things before we do end. And that is that I've really enjoyed in my new world, reaching out to lots of people across the aisle. And I've got more time for creativity. And I'm, of course, running this podcast. And I was really fascinated by you and your story. And you're a young founder and entrepreneur in this space. So, and I must say, it's not easy selling to lawyers, mate. I think you probably would agree with that at times. So well done for setting up Habeas. I hope to see you around. I'll follow you, of course. Thanks so much for your time and expertise, and all the best. Where can we find you and your business, Will?
Our website is accessible at, if you type in Habeas on Google or enter in sort of the address habeas.ai. And that's got plenty of information around sort of the product and testimonials from many of our existing customers. And you can also book in demos of the product for your firm, etc., from the link on the website, as well as contact us from there. Additionally, we've got a self-serve platform for sole practitioners. So someone's just looking to expand their personal AI usage. That's really easy and accessible for the website. They can click sign up, and they can sign up to either a subscription or a 14-day free trial. Me personally, I'm available on LinkedIn as well under for more direct reach out, which is William McCartney with 2 C's, MCCARTNEY. And I've also got my business email, I guess, which is willmccartney@habeas.ai. So plenty of ways to kind of contact and find out more about the business and the product and whether it's the right fit for someone, or just to reach out to me personally if someone's got more questions just around AI or things going on in the space or ways to collaborate.
Excellent, Will. Well, thank you again, and good luck with the venture. Good on you for having a crack, having a go, and look forward to seeing you around. Thanks for your time and expertise.
All right. Thank you, Damien. Thank you for your time.
Cheers.